Jack stood in the darkness of the kitchen, holding a can of his favorite Indian pale ale, the weariness from a long day of work still lingering on his body. The room was silent, with only the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing in the stillness of the night. He glanced out the kitchen window, where the garden lights reflected off the pool's wall. There in the dim light was the silhouette of Emily, his wife, curled up on the outdoor couch. She was looking at her phone, absent-mindedly twirling a strand of blonde hair with her right hand, a gesture Jack had always loved. Emily's long hair had always been soft and silky, and every time she twirled it like this, he always felt a sense of intimacy and closeness. But tonight, in this moment, everything felt different. Jack couldn't take his eyes off of her. There was something strange in Emily's gaze, something he had never seen before. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling, just like when they were newlyweds. But this time, that smile wasn't for him. He stood there observing her every move. Emily seemed at ease, completely different from the tension he had been feeling when she was near him lately. She was talking to someone, and although he couldn't hear the words clearly, Jack could sense the enthusiasm in his wife's voice. Perhaps it was a friend or a business partner, he thought. But then, in that moment, something inside him changed. His heart tightened. Suddenly, he realized, she wasn't just laughing with someone. She was fully immersed in a conversation with someone special, someone she didn't want him to know about. Jack stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. Everything seemed to freeze. He saw clearly how Emily twirled her hair, how she smiled when she heard something interesting, and then how she burst into laughter, a laugh he had never heard when it was just the two of them. There was such a huge difference between this laugh and the ones they shared before. For a long moment, Jack couldn't breathe. He had sensed this for a while, but now it hit him like a punch to the heart. Emily wasn't just cheating, she was enjoying this betrayal. And here he was, Jack, the devoted husband, the faithful partner, standing here, witnessing this, unable to do anything. When the phone conversation ended, Jack turned away from the window. He walked into the living room, turned on the TV, but he couldn't focus on the baseball game playing on the screen. All he could think about was one question. When did she change her heart? A while later, Emily walked into the house, her face bright as if nothing had happened. She came over, sat next to Jack, and asked, "Are you done with work? Why didn't you come outside with me?" Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply stared at her. For the first time in many years, he felt an invisible distance between him and his wife. Emily continued looking at him, her eyes full of suspicion. "I was just talking to Steve about a big project," Emily explained when she saw he didn't respond. Jack only nodded, then turned his face back to the TV screen. "Didn't you hear me?" she asked, a bit confused. "No, I didn't hear you," Jack answered, his tone void of emotion. Emily didn't say anything more. She got up, went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch next to Jack. They sat in silence, as if nothing had happened. But inside Jack, everything had changed. He couldn't bear it anymore. He knew this marriage was no longer what it had been, and maybe it was time for him to do something to regain the respect he deserved. Jack didn't say anything more, but from that moment on, his plan began to form. He wouldn't let this betrayal pass as a minor issue. He would expose the truth. The reason for his silence was terrifying. Jack had decided he wouldn't let Emily escape the consequences of her actions. Jack went back to the bedroom, but not to rest. That night, instead of sleeping with Emily like he usually did, he lay on the cold bed, pretending nothing was wrong. The feeling in his chest was like a knife stabbing deep into his heart, painful but impossible to remove. He had heard Emily's promises many times before, that no one else would come between them. But now she sat there laughing and talking with another man, as if everything was fine. He wondered if Emily even remembered those promises, or if all those memories were just forgotten as she moved on to a new life awaiting her. Jack turned his face to the wall, unable to sleep. The image of Emily sitting on the outdoor couch, her face radiant as she spoke to someone, kept repeating in his mind. Had she ever looked at him like that? Had she ever smiled like that when talking to him? He felt like a stranger, no longer important in his wife's eyes. The next morning, Jack woke up early, trying not to let Emily notice the change in his mood. He continued with his work as usual, but every time he looked at his phone, he saw a new notification from the tracking software he had installed on Emily's phone. Every move she made, every call or text, was updated on his screen. While sitting at work, Jack received a notification that Emily had gone out, and the location she was heading to was not the office as usual. His heart tightened. He clicked on the map and saw that she was in an area about 30 minutes drive away from home. It was a quiet area, seeming like a place where someone might want to avoid attention. Jack couldn't let this continue. The feeling of being betrayed had grown strong enough to make him decide he had to confront Emily. He didn't want to just stand by and watch his life be torn apart. He needed to know the truth. Jack went on a business trip to avoid facing Emily immediately. During this time, he not only worked, but also took the time to search for a way to take revenge that would make her realize the truth about what she had done. He began digging through every corner of their memories. The gifts, family photos, even the romantic dates they had shared. They had spent many years full of love and trust, but now he realized that everything might not be as he thought. When Jack returned to Chicago, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He was ready to do whatever he thought necessary. Before confronting Emily, Jack sought out a private investigator to gather more information about her secret trips. After a week of investigation, the private investigator provided Jack with photos, solid evidence of Emily's relationship with David. They didn't just meet for work, but also shared intimate moments, sweet kisses in David's house, in the garden, by the pool. The photos struck Jack like daggers to his heart, but he didn't allow himself to show weakness. He had to remain calm because everything would end when he chose to let everyone, especially Emily, see the truth. Jack silently installed another tracking app on Emily's phone. Though she tried to hide it, Jack could still tell when she left for work, when she came home, and most importantly, when Emily was with David. The pain continued to spread inside him, but it also made him stronger. When Jack returned home after his long trip, he decided he would no longer wait. He couldn't just be the one betrayed and wait in silence. The feeling of love slowly draining for Emily had been enough for him to realize there was no way to go back. He needed to take action. Just a few days later, Jack had everything prepared for his plan. He called his kids to inform them that he was getting a divorce and would no longer allow Emily to hurt him. Although it was heartbreaking, he knew this was what had to be done. The betrayal couldn't be healed by words or forgiveness. He would show Emily that everything she was doing was not only hurting him, but also breaking the respect they once had. Jack couldn't wait any longer. The feeling of betrayal still felt like an open wound, painful but slowly becoming the driving force behind his desire for revenge. He didn't want to simply know the truth. He wanted Emily to face responsibility, not just to him, but to the people who had trusted her. Friends, family, co-workers. As each day passed, Jack felt he had to become stronger. He began gathering irrefutable evidence about Emily's affair. The private investigator he hired had been tracking and providing him with valuable information. Jack reviewed the photos the investigator sent, intimate moments between Emily and David in Steve's garden. He not only saw the betrayal in his wife's eyes, but also noticed the audacity of David, the man Emily had constantly praised as a work partner when Jack confronted her about their relationship. He began to detail the plan for D-Day, the day when he would expose the truth, not just to Emily, but also to Steve, the family, and everyone Emily had deceived. Jack sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on the computer screen as the entire plan began to take clear shape in his mind. He wouldn't let anyone escape the consequences of their actions. But his plan wasn't just about throwing Emily's things out or exposing some suggestive photos. He wanted to create a real shock, one that would make both Emily and David realize that what they were doing was not only destroying his life, but also causing them to lose everything they thought was certain. Jack prepared everything, large boxes filled with Emily's belongings, from sentimental gifts, clothes, to expensive items they had bought together. He couldn't believe he was doing this, but he knew that if he didn't, everything would continue to repeat itself. And most importantly, he couldn't allow himself to continue living in a fraudulent family. That morning, Jack woke up and immediately took the first steps of his plan. He had rented a large truck, and the boxes had been carefully packed. Each of Emily's belongings was placed into a box, from the smallest items to the most expensive things she had accumulated. Notably, one large box contained the valuable dinnerware she had always loved, a gift from his mother that they had used at family dinners. Everything was packed neatly, but Jack knew that once it was thrown outside, nothing would remain intact. Before leaving, Jack received a message from the private investigator. The message made him even more determined. Emily and Steve had a private meeting the previous evening at a fancy restaurant in downtown. Jack could clearly hear the name of the restaurant and the address, which only further confirmed that their relationship was not just professional. And the night before, no one else but David had driven Emily home. An hour later, Jack arrived at Steve's house, the place where he planned to throw Emily's belongings in front of him. He parked the truck right on the wide road in front of Steve's house. Stepping out of the truck, his heart pounded, feeling like everything had been set into motion. The boxes were pulled out of the truck, and each item was thrown out forcefully. Meanwhile, Emily and Steve had no idea that their lives were about to be turned upside down. Emily was lying on the couch in the garden, chatting with friends on the phone. She didn't realize that, in just a few minutes, all her secrets would be exposed. Jack watched from a distance, each of his wife's belongings being thrown out, shattered on the concrete driveway. He didn't feel joy, only a strange emptiness. But that feeling lasted only a moment, because as soon as Emily and Steve stepped out the door, he knew this was the decisive moment. When Emily stepped out of the house, her eyes fell on the pile of her belongings scattered across the yard. She immediately realized what was happening. "What's going on?" Emily screamed, running toward the pile of things, panicked. Steve, standing beside her, furrowed his brow, not understanding what was happening. But then he saw Jack standing there, arms crossed, with a cold gaze. Fear surged inside Emily. She turned to look at Steve, her face pale. He knows," Emily said, her voice trembling. Jack said nothing, just stared into her eyes, then turned toward the truck. He opened the door and slowly pulled out a thick stack of documents. It was the divorce papers. The end of everything. "Emily," Jack said, his voice flat, "you know exactly what you've done. And now we're done. You'll pay for what you've caused." With every word he spoke, Emily felt her heart being squeezed. She couldn't believe that what she had done had led to this result. "Steve, I won't let you get away with this." Jack turned to Steve and said, "Both you and your company will have to take responsibility." Jack glanced one last time at the scattered items on the driveway. The feeling inside him wasn't victory, but release. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. He turned around, not saying another word. In that moment, his life changed forever. When Jack's truck left the driveway, a heavy silence engulfed the space around them. Emily and Steve still stood there, unable to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Emily looked around, her face filled with confusion. Each of her belongings had been thrown out, shattered on the ground, all unerasable traces of the betrayal she had caused. I don't understand what's happening," Emily said, her voice weak, still staring at the scattered belongings as if they would disappear if she didn't look at them. Steve was silent, not daring to say anything. He stood there, eyes on Emily's things, then glanced at the truck door, where Jack had just disappeared. A sense of guilt washed over Steve when he realized that he hadn't just betrayed Jack, but also the friends and colleagues he had. "There must be something wrong," Steve spoke up, but his voice was uncertain, and there was a hint of fear creeping in. Emily turned to look at Steve, her eyes pleading. "Will you help me, Steve? I can't let everything end like this." Steve didn't respond immediately. He looked toward the house, which now only radiated coldness. The walls were no longer the place of warmth a family home should be. Both of them knew that nothing could save this anymore. An hour later, while Emily was still sitting numbly on the doorstep, Steve received a call. On the other end of the line was a cold, emotionless voice. It was Jack's. "Steve, I've warned you. You and your company won't get away with this easily. I won't let this pass without consequences. You will be held accountable," Jack said, his tone calm but full of determination. Steve remained silent, but deep down, he knew there was no way to escape the consequences now. He had gotten involved in a dangerous game, and now everything was beginning to unravel. That evening, she returned to her house, where everything seemed to have changed forever. Everything inside the house remained the same, but it no longer felt familiar. Her personal belongings, the memories she had once cherished, were now thrown out, no longer of any value. She picked up the phone and tried to call Jack, but his phone was off. The anxiety inside her grew, and Emily began to feel like she was being pushed to the end of the road. She couldn't stand the silence, couldn't bear the torment from within herself. How many times had she convinced herself that her relationship with David was just work, just a professional connection? But now she had to face the painful truth that she was wrong. She had deceived Jack, the man who had been with her through so many difficulties in life. He didn't just want a divorce, he also wanted to start a tense legal battle. Jack had prepared himself for every possible scenario. He didn't want to stop at simply dividing assets. He wanted to make sure that Emily would realize that what she had done wouldn't just hurt him, but also come with consequences she would have to face. One of Jack's important decisions was to inform their children. He knew this would be a difficult conversation, but he also couldn't keep the secret forever. He called his children that afternoon and informed them that he would be divorcing Emily. "Kids, I have something very important to tell you," Jack began the conversation over the phone. "Your mother and I have decided to separate. This is something no one wanted, but sometimes in life, we have to face the truth. Your mother has not been faithful to me, and that's why everything has to end." Jack's children were shocked and confused. They had always thought their family would never face such difficulties. However, when Jack told them about Emily's betrayal and the things he had discovered, they had nothing more to say. "We'll face this together, and I will always be here for you," Jack added, trying to reassure his children. But he knew no matter how much he tried, their lives would never be the same again. She turned to Steve, but what she received wasn't comfort, but coldness and silence. Steve had withdrawn from her life, no longer caring about her apologies or pleas. Emily realized that she had not only lost Jack, but also everything precious in her life: trust, respect, and the love she once had. Jack didn't just want to end the marriage. He also wanted Emily to realize that everything had consequences. Both she and Steve would have to pay for the actions they had caused. But in a painful moment, Jack understood that nothing could change the past. He could only look to the future, where he could find the peace and happiness he deserved. Emily stood before the bathroom mirror, looking at her reflection. She noticed the wrinkles on her face, the signs of exhaustion and pain. The image in the mirror wasn't a confident, beautiful woman like before, but someone who was slowly losing everything that used to be hers. She remembered the early days when she met Jack. They had once had a fiery, sweet love, full of promises for a future together. The conversations, the long nights together, the romantic trips, all those memories were now just distant recollections. All of it had been shattered by one wrong decision that she couldn't undo. "What have I really done?" Emily asked herself, her voice echoing in the cold room. She didn't even recognize herself anymore. She had betrayed the man she once loved most, and now she had to face the consequences of that betrayal. While Emily was still immersed in her thoughts and regret, Jack was facing his own decisions. He had never imagined that his life would fall into this situation. The feeling of betrayal wasn't just emotional pain, it was also a mental numbness. But he also knew this wasn't the time to back down. That evening, Jack met with his lawyer. The room was full of papers and contracts, the dim light from the lamps adding to the heavy atmosphere. The lawyer explained the divorce process, asset division, and the next steps to ensure that Emily would be held accountable. "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" the lawyer asked, his voice tinged with concern. "This won't be easy. If you decide to go further, it could cause a lot of pain, not just for Emily, but also for your children." Jack was silent, staring directly at the lawyer. He knew that every decision had its price, but he also understood that he couldn't turn back. "I can't live in a dishonest marriage. I can't watch my wife and another man laugh together while I bear this pain. I want justice." The lawyer nodded, but his gaze still held a hint of hesitation. "But are you ready to face all the consequences?" Jack didn't respond, but deep inside, he knew he was ready. His hands clenched, and the tension and determination swelled inside him. When the first light of the new day came through the window, Emily received a call from Jack. Her heart raced. Every time she heard his name, she felt a wave of emotions hit her. "We need to talk." Jack's voice was cold over the phone, emotionless. At 5 p.m., in the park near the house, Emily felt her heart tear in two. Everything was now beyond her control. She knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. She had promised herself that she would try to stay calm, but she couldn't deny that deep in her heart, she still loved Jack, and the price to pay for this betrayal was too great. At 5 p.m., Jack stood waiting in the park, beneath the old oak tree where he and Emily had once gone when they first fell in love. The memories of those romantic afternoons were now just cold remnants. No more bright smiles, no more warmth. Everything had been shattered like the dry leaves beneath his feet. Emily approached, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She couldn't hide the pain that was evident on her face. When she saw Jack, her heart seemed to tighten. Jack didn't look at her immediately. He stood there, arms crossed, his face emotionless. He couldn't think of anything to say to her at this moment, because every word seemed like it wouldn't ease the pain in his heart. Emily walked closer, her hands trembling. "Jack, you can't forgive me?" Her voice choked up. "I really regret it. I don't know what I've done. I love you. You know that." Jack turned around, his eyes cold as they met hers. "Emily, I love you, but you've betrayed me. You've betrayed my trust, the trust of our family, everything we've built over the past 15 years. And I can't live with this lie." Emily dropped to her knees, tears beginning to fall, her voice becoming choked. "You can't do this to me. I was wrong, I know, but I really love you. Don't leave me." Jack stood silently, saying nothing. The regret and pain in Emily's eyes were clear, but that couldn't change the truth. He had made his decision. No forgiveness could save this relationship. After the meeting, Emily returned home, completely crushed. She had lost everything: her family, her trust, and herself. She called Steve, but this time, there was no comfort from him. He simply said, "I've ruined everything. I can't help you anymore." In the end, Emily realized she had to face the consequences of her actions. Regret couldn't change anything. Everything she had lost could never be regained. Jack returned home, but this time, he no longer felt weighed down by the pain. He no longer felt like the weak one. He had won, not a victory over Emily, but a victory over himself. He knew his revenge wasn't meant to destroy her, but to reclaim the freedom and respect he deserved. Jack entered the room, looked into the mirror, and realized that while life had changed, he wouldn't let the betrayal define who he was. He would continue on his path without Emily by his side, but more confident and stronger than ever before.